This is Booked for Drama, where stories burn, hearts break, the tea is always hot and never a part 2. Today we're diving into Back to the Past. Let's go. Chapter 1. Hetty Rhodes, Lance Rhodes' half-sister, took her own life after his wedding. From that moment on, he hated his new wife, Anthea Orlando. It was only then that she realized the person Lance loved had always been his stepsister. Their budding romance had been ruthlessly crushed by their parents, who forced Lance to marry Anthea, the girl who had adored him for years, to prevent their illicit affair. For 10 long years, he hated her, constantly wishing he could escape their marriage. So when the chandelier came crashing down, Lance didn't hesitate to push her away and took the full impact himself. Lying in a pool of blood, he uttered his final wish with his last breath. Anthea, I'm begging you with my life, if there's a next life, don't fall for me, don't marry me. Just let me go. Then she spent the rest of her life and billions creating a time travel device. When she opened her eyes again, she had returned to their wedding night. It was supposed to be their wedding night, but Lance was dead drunk. Because his parents had forced into marriage with a woman he didn't love, while the girl he truly desired was on a blind date with someone else. His face was flushed, his eyes hazy with intoxication as he nuzzled his face against her hand, his voice raspy with drunkenness. Hetty, don't go on that date. I can't live without you. If you fall in love with someone else, I swear I'll lose my mind. Every truth that only emerged when he drank was like a knife, twisting deeper into Anthea's heart. Falling for Lance had been all too easy. She and Lance grew up together as childhood sweethearts. He would skip class to carry her home when she sprained her ankle. He'd brave snowstorms to buy her sweet cakes when she cried from period cramps. He once broke 2 ribs fighting an entire gang to protect her. But later, she realized none of it was love. It was simply because their families were close, because he was well-mannered and inherently a good person. His love was reserved only for Hetty. They weren't related by blood. When Lance was 7, Hetty's mother Hosea Delapour married his father Fred Rhodes, forming a blended family of 4. Throughout their childhood, though Lance clearly doted on Hetty, Anthea had always assumed it was normal brotherly affection. Only later did she discover that Lance would get jealous when Hetty chatted with other boys, that he'd lost sleep over her wearing a short skirt. Also, he would hold her close and kiss her passionately when they were alone. Sadly, Anthea learned all this too late. That marriage had killed Hetty, destroyed Lance and led to Anthea's lifetime of suffering. Before activating the device, researchers had told her to rewrite fate. She must fulfill Lance's 3 regrets. Anthea's slender fingers traced Lance's face as she recalled the 3 regrets written in his diary. Regret marrying Anthea. Regret not defying my parents. Regret failing to save Hetty. She took a deep breath and whispered, Lance, this time you'll get your wish. That night, the printer hummed in the darkness. Anthea signed the divorce papers and handed them to Lance, mimicking Hetty's voice as she deceived him. Just sign this, and I won't go on that date. He practically snatched the pen and signed without hesitation. Anthea smiled, though her heart ached. Sure enough, his love for Hetty ran so deep that he'd do anything she asked. She wiped away her tears and said, You didn't even read it before signing. Aren't you afraid I'm tricking you? Lance's reactions were sluggish. After a long moment, he finally raised his hand to caress her face, his eyes filled with passion for his beloved. As long as you stay by my side, I'll give you everything. No woman could resist such words except they weren't meant for Anthea, but for Hetty. Anthea stared at him for a long time, her eyes reddening as moments passed. The next morning, she handed the agreement to her lawyer, her voice steady. The divorce papers are signed. Process them. The lawyer hesitated. Mrs. Rhodes, divorce on the first day of your marriage. Maybe you should reconsider? No need. She was firm. This marriage must end. Just then, a deep voice came from behind. End? Chapter 2. Anthea froze, whipping around to find Lance descending the stairs, still groggy from his hangover. She immediately motioned for the divorce lawyer to leave, and only after he was gone did she turn back to lie. Nothing important. You misheard. I was just consulting with a lawyer about some property matters. Despite being full of holes in her story, Lance didn't press further simply because he didn't care about her. At this point, Hetty hadn't yet committed suicide. So after their wedding, Lance's attitude toward Anthea was merely cold, not hateful. He gave a slight, rubbing his temples tiredly. Sorry, last night was a good night. I drank too much. We'll, make up for it later. A good night? Anthea's eyes reddened again, against her will. Lance, are you serious? For the entire 10 years of our marriage in my previous life, you'd get wasted every single day. Every time, you'd hold me while calling out Hetty's name. You were trapped. Your love for her was too overwhelming. That lifelong regret was like a web that trapped you, and trapped me for my entire life. She was about to speak when the butler approached with a respectful bow. Mr. Rhodes, Mrs. Rhodes, the car and gifts are prepared for your post-wedding family visit. Lance responded with a brief, before extending his hand to Anthea, his dark eyes emotionless. Let's go. Anthea hesitated for a second before placing her hand in his broad palm. Warmth instantly spread through Anthea's body from where their hands met, but it couldn't thaw her frozen heart. On the road, they hit numerous red lights, the black Maybach stopping and starting. Anthea was about to close her eyes and pretend to nap when she heard a notification, ding, from Lance's phone. She instinctively glanced over, watching his long fingers slide across the illuminated screen. From the corner of her eye, she observed his expression gradually darkening, eventually settling into an inky gloom. Suddenly, he flipped his phone over and turned to her. Anthea, something urgent came up at the company. I'm afraid I can't go with you today. I'll apologize to your parents another day. Before she could even respond, he was already stepping out of the car. Anthea lowered her eyes and lit up her own phone. On the screen was Hetty's Instagram post. The photos showing her beaming with her blind date at Luna Park in Coney Island. The center photo, where they were holding hands and gazing at each other, was sickeningly sweet. No man wants to see someone he cares about smiling so sweetly at another man, especially not Lance. So there was no company emergency. This was the real reason he rushed away. Outside the Orlando residence, Anthea's parents had been waiting for quite some time. Seeing their daughter step out of the car alone, they were momentarily stunned, then hesitant to speak. Anthea's mother Stacy peered hopefully into the car behind Anthea, and upon seeing it empty, she was about to say something but swallowed her words when she met her daughter's composed gaze. It wasn't until they were at dinner that Anthea finally spoke up. Dad, Mom, I'm divorcing Lance. Mom, fine, I'm not happy with him. I was to free Beau and myself. Please support my decision. Her voice was soft, but the more he spoke, the more fiercely her tears fell, as if she'd suffered some tremendous injustice. Toby and Stacy had no idea what had happened, but seeing their precious daughter in so much pain instantly melted their hearts. They quickly abandoned their utensils and rushed to embrace her, no longer questioning her decision. Okay, we promise. Whatever you want, sweetie. If you want out, we support you. Anthea leaned into her parents' embrace, unable to stop her tears. Anthea's parents value her very much. In her last life, her parents had spent years worrying about her, turning their hair white in just a few short years. This time, she wouldn't let that happen. Mom, Dad, after the divorce, let's move abroad. Let's go to the UK. Anthea choked out. Toby and Stacy exchanged a glance before nodding. Of course. Wherever you want to go, we'll go with you. Anthea wiped away her tears and finally smiled. This time, she wouldn't let Hetty commit suicide, wouldn't let Lance lose the love of his life, would let her parents grieve over her suffering. And she wouldn't condemn herself to a lifetime of suffering. This time, she would give everyone a happy ending. Chapter 3. For the next few days, the empty marital home never welcomed back its master. Yet Anthea could see Lance's presence every day in Hetty's Instagram posts. At the top of the Wonder Wheel at Coney Island, Lance held Hetty protectively in his arms. By the window of the grill, Lance attentively cut the steak for her. Under the fireworks at the beach, Lance tenderly covered her ears with his hands. In every photo, the way he looked at Hetty was overwhelming with his love. The caption read, "Having a brother who spoils you is the best thing ever." Quote. Someone commented below, "Girl, your brother is so hot and treats you like a princess. How are you even interested in dating other guys?" Hetty replied with a cheeky, "Icker? My brother nearly lost his mind when I tried and said he'll take care of me forever. No choice but to say bye-bye to my date." Question mark question mark question mark question mark quote. Anthea swallowed her bitterness and quietly turned off her phone. During these days while Lance was away, Anthea packed most of her belongings. Meanwhile, she contemplated how to fulfill Lance's second regret, getting Lance's parents to accept his relationship with Hetty. Hosea, being Hetty's biological mother, wouldn't be difficult to convince. But Fred was the real challenge. As the patriarch of the Rhodes family, he had spent years grooming Lance into the perfect heir. He would not tolerate any missteps. Though Lance and Hetty weren't blood relatives, they were siblings in official records. That's why in her previous life, when Fred discovered their romantic feelings, he was furious. He forcibly separated them and made Lance marry Anthea instead. Just as Anthea was considering how to persuade Fred, Lance returned. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and held out a dress to Anthea. "Family dinner tonight. You're coming with me." Anthea paused momentarily, then accepted the dress. "Okay." She lowered her gaze, playing the role of the obedient wife, not asking why he hadn't accompanied her to visit her parent nor been absent for days. Lance looked at her, then pulled a gift box from his pocket and handed it to her. "Saw this at an auction. Bought it for you." Anthea opened the box to find a bracelet inside. Recently, the news that Lance had spent over $14 million on a rare Van Cleef and Arpels necklace spread like wildfire. Everyone assumed it was for his wife. Yet his wife apparently only deserved the complimentary bracelet that came with the jewelry set. But she said nothing, simply smiled as she put on the bracelet and softly said, "It's beautiful." "Thank you." Lance watched her, a flicker of complex emotion passing through his eyes before quickly returning to his usual calm. That evening, they attended the family dinner together. At the banquet, everyone praised what a handsome couple they made and teased the newlyweds. "You two look perfect together. I always knew this would happen. I bet it won't be long before we're celebrating a baby, huh? Their kids are gonna be gorgeous." Lance clearly didn't want to deal with this situation and found an excuse to leave. Need to mail a phone call. Anthea was left alone to handle everyone's teasing remarks. Finally free from the crowd, Anthea breathed a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to leave, a familiar voice came from behind. "Sister-in-law, long time no see." Anthea turned around to see Hetty standing behind her in an elegant white dress, her figure slender and graceful. And around her neck was that very same $14 million necklace. Anthea's face froze for a few seconds, but she quickly composed herself and curved her lips upward. "Hetty, long time no see. Your necklace is beautiful." Hetty stroked the necklace around her neck with a smug smile, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "Isn't it? My brother bought it for me. It was so expensive. I told him he should give it to you instead, but he said," she let out a soft laugh, "only I was worthy of wearing it." As she spoke, she kept glancing at Anthea's expression, clearly hoping to spot a flicker of jealousy or disappointment. But Anthea remained perfectly calm, even smiling as she complimented her. "It really does suit you perfectly." Hetty was momentarily at a loss for words, unsure how to continue her provocation. She had expected Anthea to get angry, show jealousy, maybe even argue with her. But Anthea's calm reaction threw her off completely. Just as Anthea was about to leave, Hetty suddenly grabbed her hand with fake remorse in her voice. "Sister-in-law, I was at that blind date on your wedding day and never got to give you a gift. Let me make it up to you today." Anthea was about to say it wasn't necessary, but Hetty suddenly cried out dramatically, "Oh no. Anthea, don't push me." Then she deliberately threw herself into the swimming pool. Before Anthea could even process what was happening, Lance came running. The moment he saw Hetty thrashing in the water, his face drained of color. "Hetty," he shouted, panicked, before diving straight in. In his rush, he shoved Anthea aside hard. She lost her balance and stumbled, her forehead smashing hard against the stone edge of the pool. Blood immediately started flowing down her face. Moments later, Hetty was pulled out of the water. Completely soaked, she gazed pitifully at Lance, her voice quivering with feigned hurt. Brother, I don't know why she was so mad at me. She knows I can't swim, and she still pushed me. Anthea pressed her bleeding forehead, utterly dumbfounded. I didn't, but Lance shot her a single, icy glare that sent chills through her entire body. He didn't believe her. Just as she was about to speak again, Hetty's panicked voice rang out, Brother, the necklace you gave me is gone. It must have fallen into the pool. I have to find it. Lance grabbed her arm quickly. Forget it, I'll buy you another one. Let's get you to the hospital first. No, Hetty's tears were already falling. That was a gift from you. I absolutely have to find it. As she spoke, she made a move to jump back in. Lance looked at the dripping wet Hetty, then glanced at Anthea standing in the distance. His anger instantly boiled over. He said coldly, whoever lost it should be the one to retrieve it. Then he shot a look at his bodyguard. The bodyguard immediately understood and grabbed Anthea's arm and threw her into the pool. Chapter 4. Splash. Water sprayed everywhere as shocked gasps erupted from the crowd. What the hell is Lance doing? That's his newlywed wife. I heard Anthea accidentally dropped the necklace he gave his sister, so he's making her find it. I always thought people were exaggerating when they said he spoils his stepsister like crazy. Guess they weren't kidding. Anthea's body plunged beneath the surface, the icy water wrapping around her like invisible hands, dragging her down into the cold depths. It was autumn, and she was wearing only a thin formal dress. Her entire body trembled from the icy water as she struggled to climb out, but the bodyguard pushed her back down. No, don't. Anthea fought desperately, but her pleas for help were swallowed by the water. Mrs. Rhodes, the bodyguard said coldly, Mr. Rhodes says you can only come out once you find the necklace. Through blurry vision, Anthea watched Lance carrying Hetty away. The burn in her chest spread. She had no choice but to sink down and search, again and again. After 2 full hours, she finally found the necklace. When she dragged herself out of the water, her skin had turned blue-purple from the cold, and the hand clutching the necklace wouldn't stop shaking. She collapsed at the poolside, gasping for breath like a fish dying on land. The guests had all left. The house was empty. Clutching the necklace, she staggered out of the mansion. Halfway out, she suddenly realized she'd forgotten her phone. She had to turn back up the slope, but after just a few steps, she saw flames shooting into the sky in the distance. Her brain buzzed with panic. How could she have forgotten? In her previous life, the Rhodes mansion had caught fire at exactly this time. Fred had drunk too much and fallen asleep alone in his study. He nearly burned to death. Though eventually rescued, the burns left him crippled and in pain for the rest of his life. Snapping out of her shock, Anthea grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Then, without hesitation, she sprinted toward the fire. Fierce flames leapt everywhere, searing painful blisters onto her exposed skin. Fire licked at her bare legs, leaving angry red marks. Her vision blurred with the pain, but she couldn't worry about that now as she headed straight for Fred's study. Sure enough, when she pushed open the door, she found Fred unconscious inside. "Dad," she shouted, over and over, trying to wake him. When he didn't respond, she quickly began dragging him out. Just as they were about to exit, a burning beam collapsed. She shoved Fred to safety, and then everything went black. With a loud bang, her back exploded with searing pain. When Anthea woke again, she was in a hospital bed. The nurse was gently applying ointment to her back. When she saw Anthea awake, she let out a relieved gasp. "Thank God, you're awake. Your back's in rough shape. Might be a permanent scar, honestly." But Anthea wasn't concerned about her own injuries. "Where's Fred Rhodes?" she rasped. Once she had his room number, she immediately got out of bed and rushed out. But when she reached his doorway, she discovered a scene of perfect harmony inside. Hosea was holding Hetty's hand, her face beaming with pride. "Thank God for our sweet Hetty. Without her, who knows how badly your father might have been hurt. He's not young anymore, he can't handle that kind of trauma." Hetty smiled shyly. "Mommy, I just did what anyone would do." Lance stood nearby, grateful but concerned. Hetty, you should have called me. How could you rush into a fire by yourself? It was so dangerous. What if something had happened to you? I didn't have time to think, Hetty replied with a playful whine. All I could focus on was making sure Dad was okay. But look, we're both fine now, aren't we? As Hetty's voice took on that flirtatious, childish tone, everyone in the room couldn't help but smile. Even Fred, who'd been cold and stiff toward Hetty ever since he found out about her and Lance, had softened. The way he looked at her, less disapproval, more gratitude. Anthea stood in the doorway, her heart trembling slightly. She didn't understand why Hetty was taking credit for saving Fred, claiming it was her who had rescued him. But maybe this was actually the best outcome. If Fred changed his view of Hetty, perhaps he might eventually accept her relationship with Lance. So Anthea didn't expose Hetty's lie, she simply walked away in silence. For the next several days, Anthea lay in her hospital room. No one came to visit and she didn't step outside. Until that day, Lance finally remembered he had a wife and called her, the first time he'd initiated contact since their wedding. Anthea was facing the mirror, applying medication to her back. The pain made her hands tremble. The nurse had told her the scars would be permanent, never fading away. She struggled to swipe the answer button and immediately heard Lance's voice, cold as ice. Where the hell are you? Don't you know the mansion caught fire and Dad's in the hospital? As his daughter-in-law, you can't even bother to visit him once? You're seriously still mad about me punishing you the other day? Anthea gripped the phone, her fingers shaking slightly. I'm not. I've just been. Before she could finish, Hetty's voice came through the phone. Lance, don't make her come. I'm here with Dad, that's enough. Hetty's voice was sweet but carried a subtle mockery. She probably needs to blow off some steam anyway. Just let her have her fun elsewhere. Lance's breathing quickened, seemingly angered by Hetty's words. Without waiting for Anthea to speak again, he hung up. Anthea stared at her screen for a few seconds, then let out a bitter laugh. She was already used to being ignored like this, but each time, it still ached deep inside. A week later, Anthea was finally discharged from the hospital. Fred's injuries had been much lighter than hers, just some smoke inhalation, so he'd left the hospital much earlier. But instead of going home, Anthea went straight to find Fred. She knelt before him, her voice filled with pleading. Dad, please, let Lance be with Hetty. Let them be together. Chapter 5. Fred was immediately stunned by her words, his eyes filled with shock. It took a good few seconds before he snapped out of it and helped Anthea to her feet, his voice low with disbelief. Anthea, you know about them? Anthea smiled bitterly. Yes, Dad. Please accept their relationship. They really love each other. Fred furrowed his brow. Anthea, you're Lance's wife. How can you ask me to approve of them? They're siblings, for God's sake. It's impossible. Anthea studied Fred's face. Though his tone was firm, she could catch that slight hesitation in his eyes. Hetty's supposed heroic rescue had clearly made an impression on him. She pushed forward, her voice urgent. Dad, I know this is going to sound crazy. But I need you to hear me. It's true, I came back, from the future. Fred froze, his expression utterly disbelieving. A what? Anthea, what nonsense are you talking about? Anthea took a deep breath and shook her head. I'm not talking nonsense. I've already lived an entire lifetime. In that life, you forced Lance to marry me. Hetty couldn't accept it and ended her life not long after the wedding. Lance never recovered, and eventually, he followed her. Fred's face changed color, clearly struggling with this mind-boggling concept. Anthea had anticipated his reaction and continued. If you don't believe me, I can prove it. In 10 minutes, the Northgate Bridge will collapse. Wait and see if it appears on the news. Fred looked at her skeptically but eventually nodded. The two sat in the living room, waiting in silence. 10 minutes later, the news alert blared from the TV. Breaking. Northgate Bridge has partially collapsed during morning. Fred's face instantly transformed, his eyes filled with shock. He looked at Anthea, his voice trembling. That's not possible. Anthea seized the opportunity to plead again. Dad, I'm not lying. Yes, they may be sung in official records, but they're not related by blood. Please accept them. They truly love each other. Lance is your chosen heir. Surely you don't want him to meet an early death. Fred's mind was in chaos, obviously unable to process everything at once. After what felt like forever, he waved his hand weakly. Go home, Anthea. I need time to think about this. Anthea knew that Fred's resolve was already weakening significantly. She didn't push further, simply nodding and leaving. Back home, Lance still hadn't returned. Anthea sat alone by the window, gazing at the stars. The breeze fluttered her hair, and for the first time in a while she didn't feel so heavy. She thought, Lance, your second regret will soon be fulfilled. The next morning, she woke up early. Just as she was about to continue packing her belongings, the front door suddenly opened. Lance walked in with a cold expression, his tone commanding. Get dressed. We're going out on a date. Anthea was taken aback, completely caught off guard. A date? Why? Lance impatiently cut her off. Don't ask too much. Just get dressed. Before she could say anything else, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Fred. Anthea, I've thought it over. I still think the whole time travel thing is insane, but let's try this. Spend more time with Lance. I've known you two since you were kids. He must have some feelings for you. I've ordered him to come home. Go on some dates these next few days. If it still doesn't work out, I'll back off. You can make the decision yourself. Anthea looked at the message, her feelings complicated. Before she could process it, Lance spoke coldly. I've already come back for this stupid date, and you're still running to my father to complain? Anthea opened her mouth to explain, but Lance didn't give her the chance. He grabbed her wrist and dragged her straight to the car. Chapter 6. Throughout the entire day's date, Lance's face remained completely expressionless. He took Anthea shopping on Fifth Avenue, sat through a movie, even brought her to Luna Park at Coney Island, but his eyes remained cold, as if the person beside him wasn't his wife but an enemy. Anthea trailed behind him, feeling as though something heavy was pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. That evening, they sat in Per Se, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Candlelight flickered, soft jazz hummed in the background. Everything about the place screamed romance. Except for the two of them. Lance didn't eat a single bite, just kept drinking wine constantly. Anthea finally couldn't help but caution him. You should stop drinking. It's not good for you. He set his glass down with a sharp clink and shot her a cold look. My dad wants us to have sex tonight. Thought he'd get his precious heir a wedding night. But I'm not interested. If I drink enough, I won't have to deal with it. Anthea's heart sank heavily, her fingers unconsciously gripping the hem of her dress. She lowered her head, her voice tinged with bitterness. I'm not forcing you to do anything. Lance gave a scornful laugh, his tone mocking. Really? I thought you'd been all quiet and well-behaved lately. I even felt a little guilty toward you. But nope. Turns out you just ran off to Daddy to complain that I wasn't playing house properly. That's it? Anthea felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if stabbed by a knife. Anthea Orlando, the person I knew before wasn't like this. Have you changed, or did I never really know you at all? Anthea lowered her head without answering. She simply stayed with him silently until he was completely wasted. After dinner, Lance was so drunk he could barely stand. Anthea helped him home, struggling greatly to get him to bed. Just as she was about to leave, she lost her balance and fell on top of him. Their lips met, and Anthea froze in shock. Lance, however, seemed to find an outlet for his emotions and kissed her passionately. Hetty, I love you. I love you so much. His voice was husky with intoxication. Anthea's heart felt like it was being squeezed tight, the pain almost suffocating her. MMPH. Lance, you've got the wrong person. I'm not Hetty. She was about to push him away when suddenly there was a loud bang from the doorway. Anthea looked up to see Hetty standing there, her face deathly pale, eyes filled with shock and pain. Hetty, wait, I can explain. Before Anthea could finish, Hetty had already turned and run away. She wanted to chase after her, but Lance held her in an iron grip, making it impossible to move. His strength was astonishing. It took everything she had to pry free from him and bolt down the hallway. But Hetty was already gone. Anthea felt as if a stone were weighing on her heart, not knowing what kind of storm awaited them the next day. But what she didn't expect was how quickly that storm would arrive. In the middle of the night, Lance's phone suddenly rang. As he answered, whatever was said on the other end made his face turn ghastly white. Lance sobered up instantly, glaring at Anthea with eyes full of rage and anguish. Happy now? You saw it coming. Was this your plan all along? Anthea opened her mouth to explain, but Lance wouldn't listen. He grabbed his car keys and rushed out, not even bothering to grab a coat. By the time Anthea caught up, he was already starting the car. She dashed over and clutched at the window. I'm coming with you. Lance gave her an icy look. What the hell for? To hurt Hetty again? You knew I loved her, you told my dad, then made sure she saw us kiss. I swear to God, Anthea, if anything happens to Hetty, I'll hate you for the rest of my life. Anthea felt like something was crushing her heart, making it almost impossible to breathe. She gritted her teeth and said each word deliberately. Lance, I'm not trying to hurt her. I have to come because Hetty's gonna hemorrhage. The hospital's blood bank is going to run critically low, and I'm her match. I can save her. In her previous life, Hetty had died on the operating table because they couldn't find a matching blood donor in time. But Lance wouldn't listen. He stepped on the gas. Desperate, Anthea threw herself in front of the vehicle. Lance couldn't brake in time and the car slammed into her. The impact sent her flying, crashing hard onto the ground. Lance jumped out of the car, screaming in shock. Are you out of your damn mind? Anthea struggled to her feet in a pool of her own blood, stubbornly insisting. Take me with you. Lance finally gave in. When they arrived at the hospital, he was stunned to discover Anthea was right. Hetty was indeed suffering from massive hemorrhaging and the blood bank was critically low. Anthea immediately approached a nurse. I have the same blood type as her. I'll donate. The nurse, seeing her battered condition, asked in shock. Were you just in an accident? You're too weak to donate blood. But Anthea insisted. I can do it. Take my blood. The nurse reluctantly agreed and began the procedure. As Anthea's face grew increasingly pale, she bit her lip, not making a sound. Halfway through, the nurse tried to stop her. We can't take any more, you could die. But Anthea, her eyes red, stubbornly replied. No. Keep going. She needs it. In the end, they drew a full 1000 cc, nearly causing Anthea to faint. Lance quickly caught her, his voice shaking. Why are you doing this? Anthea smiled weakly, her voice barely audible. Because you matter to me, and she matters to you. Lance's heart jolted violently, as if struck by something powerful. He looked down at Anthea in his arms, a surge of complex emotions rising within him. For the first time, Lance began to re-examine Anthea's love for him. It was passionate, uninhibited, completely exposed, extending even to risking her life for someone he loved. And never asked for anything in return. Remembering the years of devotion she had shown him, his voice carried a hint of guilt. Really didn't complain to my father about me? Anthea shook her head, her voice weak. No, more than anyone else. I just want you to be happy. Lance felt something grip his heart tight. He was about to say something, but Anthea had already. Chapter 7. When Anthea regained consciousness, she found herself in a hospital room. A nurse entered, preparing to set up an IV. Anthea immediately asked, Is Hetty okay? Did she make it? The nurse nodded, her tone disapproving. Yes, she made it. But seriously, your husband dragged you in here to donate blood for his sister, nearly killed you in the process. And he's still over there taking care of her instead of you. Anthea just smiled, with a look of acceptance on her face. She picked up her phone and sent Fred a WhatsApp message. You probably already know Hetty tried to take her life. And I'm sure you've seen how the past few days between me and Lance went. He still can't love me. I'm divorcing Lance. Dad, no, Uncle Fred, you promised you'd accept their relationship. A moment later, his reply popped up. Fine. I give up. Do whatever you want. Anthea breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a weight lift from her chest. All three of Lance's regrets had been fulfilled. Everyone's fate had been changed. And it was time for her to leave. During these days, Lance hadn't visited her even once. She constantly heard from the nurses about how wonderfully he treated Hetty, but rather than feeling angry, she wore a smile. The day she was discharged, her divorce certificate arrived. She texted her parents to meet her at the airport, while she had to go home and pack the last of her things. By sunset, she was almost done when Lance walked through the door. His eyes landed on the suitcase in surprise. "So you already heard I was planning to ask you to move out?" Anthea blinked. "What?" Lance's tone was unusually gentle. "He's being discharged, but she's still very weak. I want to bring her here to stay for a while. But with you here, it might upset her. So I was thinking you could stay at Sienna Villa for a bit." Anthea paused for a moment, then simply nodded. Okay. Lance hadn't expected her to agree so easily. It finally dawned on him, was she being too understanding? She knew he had feelings for Hetty, yet she didn't argue or make a scene. She even donated blood to save Hetty and readily agreed to move out temporarily. How much must she love him to do all that? Lost in thought, he barely noticed that Anthea had finished packing. He quickly snapped back to reality and took her luggage. "I'll drive you there." Anthea's lips moved slightly as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. She just said flatly, "Let's go." On the road, neither spoke. Then Hetty called, saying she'd scalded herself with hot water, and Lance's expression immediately turned anxious. Anthea watched his long fingers impatiently tapping the steering wheel and softly spoke up. "Go to her. I can make it there myself." Once again, Lance witnessed her generosity. For some reason, it didn't sit right. He nodded, but as she was getting out, he called after her. "Anthea, we're married. I'm gonna really try to move on from Hetty. Let's give it a shot, okay? Just stay at Sienna Villa for a month. You don't have to call or text. When the month's over, I'll come pick you up myself." Anthea didn't respond. She silently got out of the car, leaving the second copy of their divorce certificate on the passenger seat. Lance drove away urgently, eager to see Hetty, completely missing the divorce papers. Anthea stood there watching his taillights disappear into the distance. She smiled faintly, lips barely moving. "Lance Rhodes, you can't let go of Hetty, and I won't be coming back. This time, you'll finally get what you wanted. I don't love you anymore, and I'm setting you free. This is goodbye for good." She hailed another Uber and headed straight for the airport. As the car crossed a bridge, she removed her wedding ring and tossed it out the window. The ring traced an arc through the air before vanishing completely into the night. Chapter 8. At the hospital, Lance rushed straight to the room, only to find Hetty crying. Without hesitation, I didn't hesitate. He rushed over and grabbed her hand, eyes wild with panic. "Hetty, hey, are you okay?" Her eyes welled up again the moment she saw his face as she turned her head away. "Why are you even here? Didn't you want to leave me?" Lance grew even more anxious, gripping her hand tightly. "Who told you that? I would never leave you. Never." That broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her face as she suddenly threw herself into his arms. "You promised you'd come right soon, but you disappeared. I really thought you were done with me." Looking at Hetty's tear-streaked face as she tried to smile, Lance's expression filled with concern as he held her, patiently comforting her. "Even if the whole world rejected you, I won't." Hetty sniffled, finally managing a teary smile as she held up her pinky. "Really? Then Pinky promised me." "Of course." Lance's tone was exceptionally tender as he hooked his finger around hers. In the days that followed, Lance stayed constantly by Hetty's side. On nice days, he'd carry her to the garden for walks. He even held her in his arms during thunderstorms to help her sleep. Soon, everyone in the hospital knew about the man in the VIP suite on the top floor who doted excessively on his wife. But some nurses who had seen the earlier news whispered gossip. Wait, wasn't Mr. Rhodes's wife someone else? Before she could continue, the head nurse quietly warned her. "Watch your mouth." Right at that moment, Lance walked by with Hetty in his arms. Hetty's eyes immediately reddened the moment she heard the whisper. She struggled to get down from Lance's arms and ran back to her room. Hetty, terrified she might do something rash, Lance instinctively moved to follow her. But then, he stopped abruptly and gave everyone in the room an icy glare. Finally, he turned to the head nurse. "I don't want to hear irrelevant people talking bullshit around here again. Clear?" With those words, the nurses collapsed in their chairs, their eyes filled with dread. They were so screwed, but Lance paid them no further attention. He was already outside Hetty's door, knocking repeatedly. Hetty, open the door, okay? Let me in. Because of the nurse's comments, Hetty had locked him out and refused to let him in. No, brother. We're siblings after all. It's not good to be so intimate that people gossip. It's better if you leave. I can take care of myself. Hetty's muffled voice came through the thick door, making Lance's heart ache. Hetty, come on, don't say that. We're not. But halfway through his absence, he trove. They were actually siblings. They always had that chance became when no one was married, no lines were crossed. But now, he was already married to Anthes. Hetty could only ever be his sister now. Lance let out a laugh and turned to leave. But then, crash, his heart leapt into his throat. He kicked the door open and rushed in. Hetty. Inside, Hetty was sitting dazed on the bed, with a shattered glass cup on the floor beside her. He rushed forward and grabbed her hands, checking them thoroughly. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave. Thank God you're okay. Back in Lance's warm embrace, Hetty finally broke down and cried pitifully. I don't know what to do without you. I can't do anything on my own. Only then did Lance realize what she'd been about to do. He rubbed her back, voice low and steady. Then don't. If you can't, don't. I'm here. I'll take care of everything. Hearing this, Hetty finally showed a satisfied smile in his arms. Chapter 9. The day Hetty was discharged, Lance brought her back to his marital home. After parking, Hetty refused to get out, looking anxiously at Lance. Maybe this isn't a good idea, she murmured. You and your wife live here, you'll probably, want your privacy. I don't want to get in the way. Lance immediately knew what she was worried about. He laughed softly and lifted her into his arms. In the way? You're the person closest to me. Besides, Anthea's moved to Sienna Villa. You can rest here without any distractions. Hetty was surprised she'd only made an offhand comment, never expecting Lance would actually send Anthea away. Seeing the undisguised love in his eyes, Hetty felt increasingly smug. Anthea, even if you're his wife, you still can't compete with me. Hetty managed to hide her grin and feigned concern. Won't she be mad? Mad? Lance paused mid-step. Anthea had always been gentle and understanding, never one to make a fuss. Lately, he'd abandoned her several times for Hetty and she never complained. Even when he asked her to move out, she said nothing, she just quietly packed up and left. She won't mind, just make yourself at home here. Late that night, after Hetty fell into deep sleep, Lance carefully slipped his arm from beneath her neck and quietly left the guest room. At the hospital, it didn't feel strange sharing a bed with Hetty. She was his sister, after all. Taking care of her felt natural. But in his marital home, he suddenly felt strangely uneasy, which was why he returned to the bedroom he shared with Anthea. He tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Hetty's question, won't she be mad? He'd answered with such certainty then, but now he wasn't so sure. Finally, he reached for his phone and turned it on. Seeing the empty WhatsApp chat and call history with Anthea, Lance froze. How could this be? He blinked, refreshed the chat, checked the call log again. Still nothing. Sure, he told her not to reach out, but she really didn't? Lance placed his phone face down on the blanket and glanced outside. The moon had been swallowed by dark clouds. A howling north wind carried fine raindrops, and moisture seeped through the imperfectly closed window, bringing a pervasive chill and extreme discomfort. Just like the inexplicable agitation in his heart. In the days that followed, Lance canceled all work, declined every dinner party and social gathering. He was glued to Hetty's side. The shareholders had complained and even reported to Fred. Lance had expected a scolding from his father, but surprisingly, nothing happened. This struck him as odd. Still, he didn't dwell on it. A few days ago, Hetty had suddenly fallen in love with a pink sapphire necklace. Since it was a private collection piece, Lance had gone to great lengths to acquire it. Today was the day to pick it up. The moment Hetty saw the necklace, her whole face lit up. To match this piece, she started browsing through the collector's handbag collection. Lance sat quietly on a sofa in the corner, keeping her company. With nothing else to do, he pulled out his phone and started checking his emails. Just then, a WhatsApp message popped up. Chapter 10. He assumed it was a message from Anthea and immediately tapped it, only to realize it was spam. He exhaled sharply and swiped back to his chat with Anthea. Still empty. He stared at it for a long time, flipping through his memory but couldn't recall a time when Anthea had forgotten to message him. Back when she got her first phone in middle school, she'd send him several messages every day. Little updates, random thoughts, reminders to eat on time, simple things, but full of warmth and care. But now, she hasn't messaged him for nearly 2 weeks. Lance not only found it strange, but realized he actually missed her. What was she doing at Sienna Villa? Was she okay? Why was she being so obedient? He told her not to call. She didn't. Told her not to text. She didn't. His longing grew stronger, washing over him like a tide. Lance couldn't sit still any longer and rose to leave. Just then, Hetty turned around with a handbag in each hand, looking at him expectantly. Lance, where are you? Where are you going? Lance snapped back to reality and quickly put his phone aside. Have you made your choice? Hetty smiled shyly, pretending to be torn. I like both. What should I do? Lance didn't speak, just took both bags from her hands. I'll pay for them. Hetty watched him walk away with a blissful expression. Only when the heavy door closed beneath him did she drop her smile and walk toward the sofa. Since she had designed Lance's password herself, she easily unlocked his phone and immediately noticed the empty chat with Anthea. Hetty stared at his phone for a long time, a flash of jealousy in her eyes. Anthea Orlando, she muttered. You're already gone, so why are you still trying to take him from me? Don't worry, I'll make sure you never come back. Then she pulled out her own phone and made a call. Take care of that villa. Burn it down. Later that night, Hetty clung to Lance like usual, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about that blank chat screen or shake the guilt creeping in. Once Hetty finally fell asleep, he slipped out of bed and quietly drove toward Sienna Villa. What he didn't know was that the moment after he left, a figure slowly emerged onto the third-floor balcony. Watching his car disappear into the distance, Hetty made another call. Has the fire started yet? The affirmative answer came quickly. A cruel smile curved Hetty's lips as she went downstairs and drove toward the north end herself. On the way to Sienna Villa, the cold wind through Lance's car window finally cleared his jumbled thoughts. He realized why Anthea hadn't reached out these days. When she got out of the car, he had promised to pick her up in a month. But since Hetty's discharge, he hadn't kept his promise. Even if Anthea wasn't angry, she had every right to be disappointed. I went to the past this time. I choose to let go. Thinking this through, his furrowed brow gradually relaxed, and he pressed harder on the gas pedal. It was okay, he would apologize properly to Anthea when he saw her. She would definitely forge him. Soon, Lance's car stopped at the hillside where the villa was located. From the end of the road to the villa, there was only a short flight of steps. At the thought of seeing Anthea soon, his steps quickened with anticipation until he reached the final step. And froze. Flames engulfed the night sky, thick smoke billowing as debris flew everywhere. Though Lance was still some distance from the villa, the searing heat licked at his exposed skin. His mind went blank. All he could think was that Anthea was inside. Anthea. Lance, heedless of danger, was about to rush in. Boom! A deafening explosion rocked the hill, sending debris flying like knives. Neighbors who had come running grabbed him in panic. Mr. Rhodes, stop. You'll die if you go in there. We've already called 911. The rescue team's on their way. Lance's eyes blazed red as he stared at the raging flames. Let me go. My wife's still in there. He tried to break free from the people holding him back, desperate to throw himself into the inferno. Mr. Rhodes, please. There's no one inside. The house was empty. Those words hit Lance like a sledgehammer, nailing him to the spot. It was neatly arranged before. Lance stood frozen. He couldn't hear anything except the rescuer's words echoing in his mid. There was no one inside. While relief washed over him, questions flooded his mind. He clearly remembered driving Anthea to Sienna Villa himself. Even though he'd abandoned her midway because of Hetty's situation, Knowing Anthea's personality, she would definitely have gone to the villa. So where the hell was she now? Lance turned and started to bolt down the mountain when, "Stop. Where are you going?" He looked up and saw Fred approaching, with Hetty and Hosea right behind him. Originally, Hetty had planned to follow Lance to witness Anthea's death. But she'd run into Fred and Hosea on the way, so she'd joined them, thinking everyone could witness Anthea's demise together. But to Hetty's surprise, when they reached the foot of the hill and saw the towering flames, Hosea didn't seem concerned about Anthea at all. She was puzzled, but she kept her mouth shut and followed them anyway. They met Lance head-on. "I'm going to find Anthea," Lance said, trying to keep his voice calm. But as he turned to head down the mountain, Fred's next words froze him in his tracks. "No need to look. She's already left the country with her parents." It felt like the ground dropped out beneath him. Lance's head spun. It took him a moment to find his voice. What are you talking about?" Fred looked at his son and sighed deeply. After Anthea had pleaded with Fred in his study, she told him that as soon as her visa got approved, she planned to leave with her parents. "And before she left, she specifically asked me to accept your relationship with Hetty after her divorce from you." Fred's words hit Lance like successive thunderbolts, making his ears ring. It was as if the world had suddenly gone silent. Divorce? Who? Lance's lips trembled uncontrollably, his words barely audible. His heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. "No way, that's impossible. She must be lying to me. Anthea had loved him so much, for so many years she couldn't divorce him. She must be deceiving him." Just the other day when he dropped her at Sienna Villa, she had nodded obediently, waiting for Le to pick her up. It hadn't even been that long. And now she is gone? His chest rose and fell with panic. He gripped the railing like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Faced with his incredulous reaction, Hetty and Hosea appeared much calmer. Hosea had once been open to the idea of her daughter and Lance being together, but the whole siblings thing made it complicated. Now that Fred had apparently given the green light. But Hosea studied Lance and Hetty's reactions with hidden concern this marriage might be difficult to realize. Meanwhile, Hetty's face was filled with wild joy. She hadn't expected Anthea to give up so easily. She'd thought she would need to work much harder to be with Lance, but Anthea had actually stepped aside voluntarily. Thrilled by this thought, Hetty threw herself into Lance's arms exclaiming, "This is amazing. Lance, we can finally be together." Heedless of Fred and Hosea's presence, she stood on tiptoes to kiss him. But Lance shoved her away harshly. "Huh?" she gasped. "Lance?" Chapter 11. Lance stood there, shaking his head over and over like he couldn't hear anything, muttering to himself, "I don't believe it." Fred silently observed Lance and Hetty's reactions, suddenly remembering what Anthea had told him. He should have noticed earlier the way Lance looked at Hetty. Now it seemed she was right, though it was a shame for such a wonderful girl as Anthea. Fred didn't say a word. Instead, he pulled out a document from his coat pocket and flipped to the last page. "All the signatures are there," Fred said quietly. "Stamped, filed, finalized. If she was lying, she wouldn't have done all this." Lance stared blankly at the divorce papers bearing both their names, taking a long time before his trembling hand reached out to accept them. His index finger kept tracing their names like he could erase it. How is this possible? He was always careful, always made sure to read everything before signing. Why would he have signed divorce papers? His thoughts drifted back to their wedding night, when a voice had coaxed him, "Sign this, and I won't go on that date." He'd been drunk out of his mind. All he could think about was stopping Hetty from seeing someone else. And now he realized Anthea had tricked him into signing the divorce papers. R.I.P. Lance. Torn paper fluttered through the air as Lance stared at Fred, enunciating each word. "This divorce agreement was signed without my knowledge. I don't accept it." Perhaps anticipating this reaction, Fred immediately produced a freshly issued divorce certificate. "It doesn't matter if you accept it or not. It's done. I found it in your car. You've had it for days, and you never even looked at it." The document in his father's hand gleamed under the morning sun like a knife to the gut. His legs gave way, and he nearly collapsed. He grabbed the railing to steady himself. He had to find Anthea. He had to see her immediately. Only one thought occupied his mind: he couldn't divorce Anthea. It was absolutely unacceptable. He rushed down the hill without a second thought. The day was breaking, with warm sunlight gently embracing the world. But Lance's world had already fallen apart. On the first day after Anthea left, Lance finally called her directly for the first time in years. The windshield blurred his view, but he could still make out the sun being swallowed by storm clouds. The sky went dark, just like Lance's heart was sinking bit by bit. Anthea didn't answer his call. Not once. Lance took a deep breath and tried calling her parents, but the result was the same: no one picked up. His hand on the steering wheel tightened. He began calling Anthea's friends, acquaintances, even her former teachers and classmates. But no one could tell him where Anthea had gone. On the second day after Anthea left, Lance returned to the marital home and pushed open the door to her study, hoping to find her. Timidly, he found something tucked in the pages of a dark book. Inside was a single folded paper fortune cookie which Anthea had written long ago. "I wish that one day I could visit New Zealand with the person I love." On the third day after Anthea left, Lance boarded a plane to New Zealand, but after searching the entire country, he still couldn't find any trace of her. Not ready to give up, he scoured all of Europe. Still no sign of her. Just as he was about to board a flight to America, Fred called and demanded he return home. What the hell are you thinking? Chapter 12. He and Anthea had grown up together, sure. Childhood friends, nothing more. If his relationship with Hetty hadn't been exposed, he would never have had anything beyond friendship with Anthea. He was forced into that marriage, and even afterward, he treated her the same distance, always choosing Hetty over her. Once, a friend even asked him, "Don't you think Anthea might get pissed off? Upset?" He thought he was already doing her a favor by not making her life harder. She had to be upset? The first time he really lost it with Anthea was when she supposedly tattled to his dad and caused Hetty to spiral. Someone else called him afterward, trying to talk him down. "Dude, she's still your wife. What if you push her too far and she walks away?" Lance had remained unconcerned. No way. Anthea was crazy about him. She would never leave. Lance had always been that confident until Fred had handed him their divorce paper. Until he searched for her for days with no trace. Until she stopped haunting his phone and started haunting his dreams. Then he came to realize the truth. Lance looked down at his phone screen. It displayed the only wedding photo he had with Anthea, the same one he'd found in her study, polished as if she'd wiped it clean repeatedly. Somehow, without thinking, he'd set it as his phone wallpaper. Now, looking at Anthea's smiling face, her eyes curved into crescents, the answer he'd been ignoring rising up from somewhere deep. He did love Anthea. Fred looked at Lance's expression and scoffed. "What about Hetty? You're saying you don't love her?" That answer always came easily before. Not this time. Lance used to believe Hetty was different. She'd been with him first. He'd always paid extra attention to her. Over time, that attention became possessiveness. Whenever Hetty went on dates or blind dates with other men, Lance would feel inexplicably annoyed, as if someone were eyeing a toy he'd treasured for years. That's why he'd repeatedly dragged her back. He'd thought this was love. Until he met Anthea. Until Anthea suddenly divorced him and left the country, and he couldn't find her anywhere. Only then did Lance finally understand what love truly meant. Love meant tearing the world apart just for Anthea. He'd even started having hallucinations, constantly feeling like he just needed to turn around and he'd see her, walking toward him. His longing for her had become an obsession, a sickness. "I think I finally figured out who I really love," Lance said, voice hoarse. "And Hetty, she's just my sister." Bang! The study door suddenly flew open. Hetty, who had been eavesdropping, stood there with bloodshot eyes, letting out a cold laugh. Sister? Hetty couldn't believe those words had come from the man she'd loved for so many years. He had loved her so deeply before. Even when everyone repeatedly reminded them of their sibling status, he would correct them. "We're not siblings, we're just a couple who can't be together." He'd even told her, "I can give you everything except an official title." Lance had been so serious when saying these things, So Hetty had given him her whole heart and all her love. Now he claimed that he only saw her as a sister. Ha ha ha. Hetty laughed until tears streamed down her face. Sister? Then what kind of brother kisses his sister in secret? What kind of brother ruins her dates on purpose? What kind of brother shares a bed with his sister, huh? Chapter 13. Hosea rushed in, alarmed by her daughter's hysterical state. But Fred rose first, pulling his wife away. Let him handle his own mess. Bang! The door slammed shut behind them. Alone in the suddenly silent study, Hetty stared at Lance through her tears, her heart shattering into pieces. For a moment, she questioned if all the years she poured into him had been completely wasted. She always knew they couldn't be public, given their relationship. But that hadn't mattered to her. All she needed was his love, his exclusive love. That's why she'd happily let him sabotage her blind dates, allowed him to pull her away from other men, even encouraged him to abandon his newlywed wife for her. When news broke that Anthea had divorced Lance and left the country, Hetty had been overjoyed. Finally, she thought they could be together openly. But now this? Lance claiming he only saw her as a sister? That he had feelings for Anthea? No, absolutely not. Lance could only belong to her. Fred never learned exactly what happened between them that night. All he heard was a furious shout followed by a woman's terrified scream. When Fred and Hosea rushed over, they found two naked figures, one sitting on the bed, the other wrapped in torn clothes, fallen to the floor, sobbing. By the next morning, the scandal had exploded across New York society. The Rhodes heir planning to marry his own stepsister. The father and son marrying mother and daughter became the choicest gossip in their social circles. Back in his study, Lance had already smashed everything in sight, his face livid with anger. You knew she tried to drug me, he spat at his father. You knew it was called, so why are you forcing me to marry her? Fred didn't look at him, his tone eerily calm. You've already hurt one woman. I won't let you destroy another's. Lance, I'm getting old. I just want to see you settled. These words fell on deaf ears. Lance glared at his father for a long moment before storming out. Anthea is the only wife I'll ever acknowledge. Across the Atlantic, the scandal reached the Orlando family. Toby and Stacy were stunned by the news that Lance and Hetty were getting married. So when you told us he loved someone else, Stacy finally managed, you meant Hetty. Anthea had long known about Lance and Hetty's relationship, so she just nodded calmly. Bang! Toby slammed his fist on the table in anger. Those Rhodes bastards. Now it all makes sense why they pushed so hard for that marriage. They wanted our daughter to be their family's cover-up. Stacy's face darkened as she laughed bitterly. How to calculate? Whether or not they succeeded in separating Lance and Hetty, all the blame would fall on Anthea. They'd stay clean while my daughter got painted as the villain. Anthea thought the same. Wasn't that exactly what happened? The Rhodes had forced Lance to marry her, yet Lance had blamed her for everything, ultimately causing her such despair that she died. Thank goodness she'd broken free from this toxic relationship in this lifetime. From now on, neither Lance nor any of the Rhodes would have anything to do with her. Toby and Stacy, however, only grew angrier. They immediately wanted to fly back and confront Lance personally. Anthea hastily stopped them, spending considerable time convincing them to abandon the idea. Just as Toby and Stacy had finally calmed down, the butler entered with an uncomfortable expression. Sir, madam, miss, there's someone at the door claiming to be the young lady's husband. Chapter 14. The butler, newly hired after the Orlando family moved to England, didn't recognize Lance. However, knowing Anthea was single, he didn't immediately let Lance in. Instead, leaving him outside while he went to report inside. Lance is here? Toby smashed his teacup on the floor. Tell him to get lost. The butler hesitated. Though he didn't know Lance personally, the way he was dressed and the aura around him, he knew this was no ordinary person. If he messed this up, the consequences could be dire. Seeing the butler's dilemma, Anthea spoke up. Just tell him I won't see him. The butler returned shortly after. Miss, he says he won't leave until he sees you. Anthea considered this briefly, then followed the butler toward the front door. Anthea, Stacy called out anxiously. Understanding her mother's concern, Anthea gave her a reassuring smile. It's okay, Mom. I've got this. The heavy door stood like a barrier between her and Lance. When she'd left New York, Anthea had known that with the Rhodes's resources, Lance would eventually find her. If her memory served correctly, today was supposed to be Lance and Hedy's wedding day. Why wasn't he back home being a groom instead of chasing his ex-wife across the ocean? Lance clearly had different thoughts. His eyes lit up as soon as he saw her walking toward him. Anthea, if not for the door between them, he would have rushed forward to embrace her. Unlike Lance's excited demeanor, Anthea remained remarkably composed. Even her eyes were void of the usual warmth. Why are you here? Her tone was cool and detached, nothing like the warm, patient voice Lance was accustomed to during their marriage. Taken aback by her coldness, Lance finally managed to say hoarsely, "I've come to take you home?" Realizing how strange that sounded, he quickly added, "The divorce. I don't agree with it. You're still my wife." Wife? Anthea almost laughed at that. Throughout their entire marriage, he'd never once treated her like a wife. Now that they didn't love him anymore, he wanted to claim her as his wife again? Lance, you don't need to agree. I don't need your permission to divorce you. And anyway, you've got Hedy. Hearing this, panic flashed across Lance's face. I'm not with Hedy. She's just my sister. Anthea, you're the only one in my heart. Her lips curved into a bitter smile, and as the tears started to fall, she wiped them away quickly and said in a steady voice, "Lance, there's someone in your heart, but it's not me. If you or your family had been honest from the beginning about your feelings for Hedy, I never would have married you. Then she wouldn't have been wounded by his coldness and contempt. Let's pretend the past never happened. Don't come looking for me again. I won't turn back for you." Her words were final as she turned and disappeared from Lance's sight. Lance stood frozen, stunned by what Anthea had said. He'd never known she would have refused to marry him. In the past, she had seemed to adore him. Especially the joy in her eyes when she heard about the marriage contract, the way she'd practically glowed. Why, even if he'd been honest about his relationship with Hedy, why couldn't she give Lance either chance now? Lance's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. The pain spread throughout him, he barely noticed it. He remained motionless. Even as rain began pouring down, drenching him completely, he didn't move. "Lance, let's go back home, okay?" Chapter 15. A gentle female voice broke through the downpour beside Lance. He turned to the story to find Hedy holding an umbrella over him. Looking at his vacant eyes, Hedy felt a bitter lump in her throat that she couldn't swallow or spit out. Today should have been the happiest day of her life. From this day forward, she would no longer be Lance's stepsister but Mrs. Rhodes, finally standing proudly by his side. But her groom had fled their wedding. She'd taken an overnight private jet to England, only to find him standing like a ghost outside the Orlando estate. Why was he so obsessed with Anthea when she clearly didn't love him anymore? "Can't you just turn around and see me for once?" she pleaded. Gone was Hedy's previous smugness, replaced by endless humiliation. She thought, even if Lance didn't love her now, they shared years of history. They had a lifetime ahead of them, surely he would grow to love her eventually. But Lance crushed her hopes with his answer. "Hedy, what happened between us was a mistake. Forcing this won't end well for either of us." Hedy refused to accept it. She hurled the umbrella at him, screaming through her tears. "What about you? She doesn't love you anymore. Why can't you just move on? Lance, you have no choice but to be with me." Lance didn't react. He didn't even glance at her as he walked away into the curtain of rain. Lance. No matter how desperately Hedy screamed his name, he never once paused. Her entire body shook violently as she dug her nails into her palms, fighting for control. Finally, she turned to look at the mansion one last time before disappearing into the rain herself. Anthea thought she'd made herself perfectly clear. She never expected to run into Lance again at a charity gala. Hedy was right beside him, vigilantly warding off any woman who came near. Anthea tried to pretend she hadn't seen them and turned toward another guest, but a long arm suddenly blocked her path. "Anthea." Lance made her stop in her tracks, but her eyes never left Hedy's face. Jealousy, vigilance, anxiety, every emotion imaginable played across the other woman's features. For a moment, Anthea saw her former self in Hetty, guarding against every woman who approached Lance. While completely missing Hetty, she pulled her eyes away and looked up at Lance. "Excuse me, Mr. Rhodes." The formal address visibly pained him. "Anthea, must we really be so distant?" "Distant?" A cold smile curled Anthea's lips. "If you call Mr. Rhodes counts as distant, then what would you call your attitude toward me during our marriage? And we're not even married anymore. You have your own wife now. Isn't maintaining basic boundaries appropriate?" Tired of this pointless exchange, Anthea pushed his arm away and walked off. "Anthea." Lance reached out to stop her, but Hetty wasn't having it. She clung to him, desperately building onto his arm. "Lance, I'm your wife now." Her pathetic words made Lance frown. He stared coldly at the tearful woman before him. For the first time, he found Hetty's crying irritating. Anthea never cried like this. Even when he'd sent her away for Hetty's sake, she'd always handled herself with grace. Hetty cried louder the more he ignored her. Their commotion quickly drew a crowd of onlookers. The scandal of the Rhodes stepsiblings' marriage was already a joke among the rich and elite. Though too well-mannered to gossip openly, their mocking glances made Lance deeply uncomfortable. As the Rhodes heir, he'd always been the center of admiration at social events. This was the first time he'd been scrutinized with such judgment. Taking a deep breath, he ripped Hetty's arms off him. "Hetty, I'm telling you for the last time. We are not married, you are not my wife, and we will never be together." Chapter 16. Lance threw out those words and walked away without a backward glance. Hetty stood frozen, staring after him as his figure disappeared. The hurt in her eyes gradually transformed into hatred and bitter resentment. Her nails dug so hard into her palm, blood started to drip onto the polished marble floor. Anthea Orlando. Across the room, Anthea was enjoying a pleasant conversation with a socialite when the furious voice rang out behind her. She turned instinctively to see Hetty storming toward her in stiletto heels, face contorted with rage and hand raised to deliver a slap. Anthea caught the slap just in time, then tossed the red wine in her glass straight into Hetty's face. Ah! Smack! A clean slap followed, landing hard across Hetty's cheek, leaving an angry red welt on her porcelain skin. "Hetty, have you completely lost your mind?" Anthea had tolerated Hetty for years because of Lance. Now that she no longer loved him, she had no reason to be polite anymore. Hetty's carefully styled hair had come half undone from the slap, loose strands falling across her crazed expression and those venomous eyes. She stared at Anthea's composed face for a long moment before viciously wiping the dripping wine from her own. "I've lost my mind? What about you? Always throwing yourself at Lance like some shammers." Smack! Another slap from Anthea silenced her. "If you can't control that mouth, try shutting it first. Let's get something straight. Lance and I are done. He's the one stalking me. So if you're having a great problem, take it up with him." But Hetty wasn't hearing a word of it. Her mind was consumed by hatred. When Lance first refused to marry her, she'd wanted to confront Anthea directly. But for once, her mother had stopped her, told her to tone it down, to act softer. "Men pity fragile girls," she'd said. "Let him feel guilty, let him feel sorry for you." Being the obedient daughter she'd always been, Hetty had followed her mother's advice. But it hadn't worked at all. Lance still refused to give her even a glance, his entire being focused on Anthea. Hetty had been taken good care of in the Rhodes household, even though she couldn't tolerate this kind of humiliation. So she'd come to eliminate the root cause of her problems. "You should die in that fire, Anthea." Only with Anthea gone could Lance truly belong to her. With unexpected strength born of rage, she suddenly grabbed Anthea's arm and tried to throw her down the nearby staircase. They were standing on an outdoor terrace, where the only exit was a long, steep flight of stone steps. A fall would mean death or permanent disability. Anthea fought desperately, but Hetty had been consumed by hatred. Anthea was destabilized by her high heels. In the next moment, Anthea felt nothing beneath her feet as she began plummeting down the stairs. Anthea. Lance's voice tore through the chaos as he ran toward them straight in time to dive forward and grab her. Thud. They both went tumbling down the stairs. Slowly, blood spread beneath them. Ah! Someone call an ambulance. The air filled with screams, alarms, and eventually ambulance sirens, all blending into chaos. But Anthea only felt an overwhelming drowsiness. Then her eyelids drooped. Everything faded into black. Chapter 17. Smack. Outside the operating room, Hosea slapped Hetty hard across the face, her voice filled with disappointment. How did I end up with a daughter like you? Hetty's mother had always assumed her daughter's wildest actions would be something like drugging Lance. She never imagined Hetty would push someone down a staircase. If Fred hadn't angrily investigated Hetty's past after this incident, Hosea would never have discovered her own daughter had attempted arson and murder. Hetty kept her head down, covering her stinging cheek. After a long silence, she finally mumbled, "Isn't this what you taught me, Mother?" When Hetty was 6, Hosea had divorced her alcoholic, abusive husband. She'd left with nothing but custody of her daughter. Life as a single mother had been brutal. After years of struggling, Hosea managed to marry Fred of the Rhodes household. Rhodes, transforming herself into the new lad? The privileged lifestyle had finally allowed Hosea to relax. With time on her hands, she'd focused on grooming Hetty. She'd passed on all her hard-earned wisdom, teaching Hetty exactly how to marry well and secure a comfortable future. Yes, I told you to use whatever means necessary to catch a good man, Hosea hissed, trembling with rage, but I never told you to break the law. She raised her hand for another slap. That's enough. Fred's sharp command cut through the tension as he emerged from signing paperwork, interrupting Hosea mid-swing. Hosea's eyes immediately welled with tears as she approached Fred. "Darling, this is all my fault." A single tear slid down her cheek before she could finish. This manipulation tactic, which had worked countless times before, now seemed to have minimal. Fred's expression softened slightly. She was, after her wife of many years. Without responding to her, he simply instructed Moses to accompany him to Anthea's hospital room to apologize to the Orlando family. But the Orientos wouldn't even let them through the door. "Please leave now," Toby Orlando stated firmly, blocking the doorway with an unmistakably cold expression. "We're not influential enough to deal with your apologies." He'd thought his daughter's divorce from Lance would be the end of their troubles, never expecting this new nightmare. Though the Orlando family couldn't match the Rhodes' influence, Toby showed absolutely no deference. His daughter's welfare was all that mattered to him. Fred, knowing they were in the wrong, couldn't even get angry. He could only inquire politely about Anthea's condition. Thanks to Lance's body breaking her fall, Anthea hadn't been seriously injured and would recover after a few days of rest. Hearing this, Hosea finally relaxed. Though genuinely angered by her daughter's actions, she hadn't wanted another death in Hetty's hands. After repeated apologies to the Orlandos, Hosea and Fred finally left. One more thing, Toby's voice stopped them in the hallway, though they didn't turn around. "I never want to see Lance Rhodes again." The message couldn't have been clearer. Fred said nothing and continued walking away with Hosea, but Toby knew he would comply. 3 days after falling into a coma, Lance finally regained consciousness. After Fred checked on his health, he told him the decision about what to do with Hetty was up to him. Though Hosea felt heartsick for her daughter, Hetty continuing down this destructive path, so she remained silent. After a moment of silence, Lance spoke quietly. "I need to talk to her." In the hushed hospital room, Lance observed Hetty, who couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. His mind drifted back to their first meeting. That afternoon, a young Hetty in a pink dress had grabbed his hand, sailing brightly. "So, you're my brother now?" How had that innocent, sweet child transformed into this venomous woman? "Why?" Lance's voice barely broke the silence, and after what felt like an eternity before Hetty finally spoke. Her voice barely above a whisper, filled with tears. "I love you too much. I couldn't accept seeing you with anyone else." Chapter 18. Despite Hetty's pitiful tears, Lance felt no sympathy whatsoever. He closed his eyes and called for the butler. "Handle it as you see fit." The meaning was clear. He wouldn't waste another moment on Hetty, no. No, please, she cried out, panic rising in her voice. Lance, you can't do this to me. I can't go to prison. Fear contorted Hedy's face, but Lance remained unmoved. Lance. Hedy fought desperately as she was dragged away, her long nails leaving deep scratches in the doorframe, but the butler pulled her out regardless. Thud. The heavy hospital door closed, sealing off her anguished screams. Only then did Lance open his eyes and climb out of bed. Since waking up, he hadn't heard a single word about Anthea. He'd tried casually probing for information, but everyone had stonewalled him completely. A sense of unease gnawed at him. Lance attempted to leave his room immediately after dealing with Hedy, despite his unhealed injuries. 2 bodyguards instantly blocked his path. Sir, Mr. Rhodes gave orders. You're not allowed to see Miss Orlando anymore. Lance ignored them, demanding they get out of his way. But the bodyguards stood firm. Please don't make this difficult for us, sir. Fuck off. Lance shouted. Lance Rhodes. A sharp voice rang out, stopping him in his tracks. Fred stood at the end of the corridor, glaring at his son. Get back to your room. Now. Dad, why can't I see her? Lance demanded. Fred laughed coldly. Why should she see you? You've done so much damage, do you really think you can just waltz back into her life? These sharp questions left Lance speechless. Without waiting for a response, Fred instructed the bodyguards to maintain their position and left. Later that night, Fred heard news that he'd escaped the hospital to look for Anthea. Should we go after him, sir? One of the bodyguards asked. Fred shook his head. Let him be. Maybe then he'll learn something. It was the only way he'd learn his lesson. In the dead of night, a man in hospital clothes arrived breathless at the Orlando estate. No matter how Lance pleaded, the security guards refused to let him in. Eventually, the butler emerged with a message from Toby. Mr. Rhodes, please. Just leave her alone. Stop trying to hurt my younger lady. Crack. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Lance's deathly pale face. Torrential rain beat against his skin, snapping him back to reality. Hurting her? What do you mean? The butler's expression hardened completely. How convenient that you've forgotten. Did you forget concealing your feelings for your stepsister before marrying our Miss Anthea? Did you forget repeatedly neglecting and mistreating her for Hedy's take after your wedding? I am place in your eyes, knows of that courses, yet these actions early cost our young lady. But don't worry yourself, Miss Otwa no longer needs your apology. Another thunderclap shook the night, making Lance's ears ring. He drenched his fists, fighting to control his trembling body. Deep down, Lance had always known his actions would hurt Anthea, but his mind had been so consumed with Hedy that he'd justified everything. Anthea was understanding. She wouldn't mind, even when she was obviously upset. He'd thought a simple apology would fix things. He'd even forgotten to apologize sometimes, assuming she wouldn't care anyway. Now Anthea truly didn't care anymore, and Lance felt a hollowness in his chest, as if something vital had slipped away, something he could never recapture. As the butler continued speaking, he noticed Lance's drenched clothing and pallid face. He softened his tone slightly. Mr. Rhodes, you know we can't compete with the Rhodes. If you continue pursuing Miss Anthea, it will only cause more pain for everyone involved. Please, let her go. Don't come back. WHIRRRR. The heavy iron gate slammed shut in front of him, the sound echoing in his ears like a final warning. Lance's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 19. Lance stood there, staring at the pitch-black villa in the distance. A bitterness suggests. Ever since his relationship with Hedy had been exposed and father had been telling him to give up on her. His friends warned that he'd gone too far. Even a heartiest apology might not be an ether's forgiveness. Fred had pointed out that the Rhodes were the ones at first for concealing his feelings for Belai and deceiving Anthea. She hadn't even made a scene over the forced wedding. If Lance kept posting her, it would just make him unreasonable. The Orlando butler had practically begged him to leave Anthea alone, insisting that confined pursuit would only hurt both of them. And Anthea herself had said she would never turn back to him. But Lance couldn't accept it. Anthea had loved him for so long, and he'd only just realized his own feelings for her. The love that should have been mutual had been unknowingly destroyed by his own hands. He hadn't even had a chance to fix it before it all came crashing down. Lance shifted, intending to knock on Orlando's gate again, but as he raised his hand, a sudden weakness overcame him. His vision darkened, and he collapsed. Lance fell seriously ill, Anthea's name constantly on his fevered lips. Fred, despite his anger, couldn't completely ignore his son's condition. No matter how much he resented what Lance had done, Fred's fatherly instincts kicked in. Too ashamed to ask Anthea directly, Fred had someone call her, pleading for her to visit Lance in the hospital, just to talk. The call was on speaker, allowing both Toby and Stacy to hear every word. After hearing Fred's request, they were furious and reached for the phone, ready to give him a piece of their minds. Their precious daughter, whom they'd cherished for over 20 years, had been hurt by Lance for so long. They'd already been more than generous given Fred's past help to their family. How dare he make such a request now? Anthea held her parents back and took the phone to the balcony. "Mr. Fred, I'll agree to visit Lance, but I have one condition." Fred was elated. He'd been prepared to be cursed out by the Orlando family, never expecting Anthea to agree so readily. "Yes, of course. Anything you want. Just come and see him, that's all I'm asking." Anthea watched the setting sun as she spoke softly. "I want." After several days in the hospital, Lance's fever finally broke, and he regained consciousness. Still groggy when he saw Anthea standing beside his bed, he thought he must be dreaming. He gave a bitter laugh. Another dream. Not a dream. That familiar voice sent a jolt through him. Lance's eyes flew open, and he tried to sit up and embrace her. But his illness had left him too weak. He managed to rise briefly before falling back onto the bed. "Anthea." He gazed at her with desperate longing, as if trying to etch her features permanently into his memory. Unlike Lance's agitation, Anthea remained remarkably calm. "Lance, I thought with your personality, you wouldn't keep coming after me after the divorce." Lance opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Anthea shook her head. "Because it seems that I was never in your heart. I knew something was off between you and baby from the beginning. But I thought, no matter what, you two were siblings. It can idiot go too far and I tried to ignore the nagging feeling I had. But I was wrong, and I kept hoping that once we got married, you would change, that you'd finally start to care about me. But you didn't. You know what, Lance? I knew about every lie you told at Hetty. At first, I wanted you to admit it. But later, I just gave up. Because I stopped loving you. Think about it. If you were me, if you'd lived through what I did, would you forgive yourself?" Chapter 20. Anthea's voice remained eerily calm throughout, as if she were recounting a stranger's story. As she finished speaking, she saw the mix of guilt and regret flicker across Lance's face. There were so many things Lance wanted to say to her, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. "I'm sorry. Sorry for deceiving her when she loved him so deeply. Sorry for lying to you, as if it was nothing. Sorry for knowing she was hurt but not caring. Sorry for still wanting her when she no longer cared." His apology had finally reached Anthea, after spanning 2 lifetimes. She wanted to appear magnanimous, to smile at Lance and say it didn't matter anymore. But as soon as she opened her mouth, she tasted the salt of her own tears. Seeing Lance's panicked expression, Anthea touched her face, only then realizing she was crying. But why should she be sad? She didn't love him anymore, did she? Anthea couldn't understand her own reaction, but she wouldn't search for answers either. Shortly after his discharge from the hospital, Lance formally invited Anthea to meet, saying he wanted a proper goodbye. After some consideration, she agreed. When her plane landed and she spotted Lance at the terminal, she was visibly surprised. He was wearing the same outfit he'd worn years ago, when Fred had forced him to take Anthea on that date. Her startled expression made Lance smile softly. He instinctively reached for her hand, then remembered their current status and pulled back. "Shall we go?" The car he'd brought was the same Maybach as before, but the interior had been transformed from Heaty's preferred pink to Anthea's understated elegance. Even the music playing was from Anthea's favorite playlist. She said nothing, just closed her eyes and pretended to doze. Lance paused, then quietly adjusted the temperature higher. For lunch, they went to Anthea's favorite Italian restaurant, ordering all her preferred dishes. Throughout the meal, Lance attentively served her, refilling her wine, offering bread, anticipating her needs. His thoughtfulness caught the attention of a woman at a nearby table, who nudged her husband. "See how attentive he is. Why can't you be more like that?" Anthea turned to the woman with a gentle smile. "He's not my husband. He's my ex-husband." Oh, embarrassment flashed across the woman's face before she smiled awkwardly. "Sorry." Anthea shook her head and returned to her meal. Lance, meanwhile, showed no reaction whatsoever. After dinner, he took her to a movie. He used to take her to the movies often, but back then, Hetty was always around. So whenever they bought tickets, he would pick movies Hetty liked, with Anthea's preferences being irrelevant. Even when Hetty wasn't physically present, Lance and Anthea had never watched a complete film together. He would either stand her up for Hetty or leave midway through. This was the first time they stayed for the entire movie, one that Anthea actually enjoyed. By the time they emerged from the theater, night had fallen, with stars dotting the dark canvas above. Halfway through the drive, Lance suddenly pulled over. Before Anthea could react, he was out of the car and opening her door. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. Instead of answering, Lance simply gestured toward the sky. Suddenly, fireworks burst into bloom one after another. The dazzling display stopped passers-by in their tracks, and even Anthea found herself captivated. She stepped out of the car and walked to the riverbank, gazing up at the spectacle. The fireworks were beautiful but fleeting. In their final moments, they formed Anthea's initials before fading into darkness. She remained transfixed, suddenly understanding what Lance was doing. Years ago, Anthea had loved anything sparkly, with fireworks being her absolute favorite. Back then, Lance had still doted on her and promised fireworks displays for her birthdays. But when the final display revealed someone's name, Anthea had discovered they were actually meant for Hetty. She was merely an incidental spectator. Being young then, she couldn't hide her feelings and would cry, asking Lance why. He would apologize, promising that Hetty just happened to like fireworks too, and next time he'd arrange a display just for Anthea. But after countless next times, her personal fireworks show never came. Now that they were divorced and she no longer loved him, his exclusive display finally arrived. Just like Lance's love for her only offered when she no longer needed it. Chapter 21. Instead of taking Anthea to a hotel that night, Lance brought her back to their former marital home. When Anthea had left in such a rush, there were so many things she didn't get a chance to take or throw away. The house remained exactly as it had been when she departed, as if waiting for its mistress to return. Now she was back after all this time, but as a guest. The staff were the same people who had served Anthea before. They couldn't contain their excitement, though the word, Mrs., lingered on their tongues before reluctantly transforming into Miss Orlando. Anthea acknowledged them with a warm smile at the corners of her eyes, then politely asked, "Which room will I be staying in?" The butler glanced at Lance for confirmation, then led her upstairs. Her room wasn't their former master bedroom, nor was it Hetty's old room, but a newly prepared south-facing suite arranged according to her tastes. Anthea surveyed the space, and just as she was about to step onto the balcony for some fresh air, a knock sounded at her door. Opening it, she found Lance standing there in his pajamas. "What's wrong?" Lance studied her for a long moment before answering. "Nothing. I just wanted to say good night." Back when Anthea had lived in this house, she'd always wished him good night before bed. Eventually, it had become Lance's habit too. After she left, his good nights went unanswered, and he gradually developed insomnia. Anthea clearly remembered this as well. She looked at him and said softly, "Good night." That night, Lance slept better than he had in ages and even had a beautiful dream. In it, Anthea hadn't left him. They were deeply in love and grew old together. But in reality, he woke to an empty room and felt as if his blood had turned to ice. The word, Anthea, caught in his throat. Then a familiar, gentle voice came from behind him. "Why are you just standing there?" Before Anthea could finish her question, Lance wrapped his arms around her. His voice trembled against her ear. Thank God. Thank God you're still here. Lance knew their time together was counting down, that it would eventually reach zero. He could accept Anthea leaving him again, but he couldn't bear to wake up and find her suddenly gone without warning. Anthea remained silent, allowing him to hold her. She understood exactly what he feared, but unlike before, she didn't hug him back or offer comfort. This was, after all, their final farewell. Over the next few days, Lance and Anthea revisited their city together. They went to Times Square, to Central Park, even to their old high school. All traces of Lance and Heathie's past romantic encounters had been erased, leaving only blank spaces. Lance had initially wanted to create new memories with Anthea in these places, but she said there was no point. They had already gone their separate ways. New marks mean nothing. Lance pressed his lips together, but ultimately agreed with her wishes. Finally, they visited a photography studio. Ironically, despite knowing each other for so many years, they didn't have a single photo of just the two of them. All their pictures together included Hetty or other people. Even their wedding certificate photo had been digitally created. Now Lance begged Anthea to take one real photograph with him, to provide closure to their story. Chapter 22. Anthea agreed, but in the photograph, they stood far apart from each other, the space between them like an unbridgeable chasm. She wouldn't come closer, and he couldn't cross over to her. The photographer jokingly remarked that they didn't look like a couple having a photoshoot, rather like a divorced pair capturing one final goodbye. Lance's lips curved in a bitter smile. Wasn't that exactly what they were? On Anthea's last night in New York, Lance unexpectedly handed her a newly drafted divorce settlement. When I signed the original papers, I wasn't thinking clearly, he explained. Many of the terms weren't properly written. I want to do this right. Let's sign a proper divorce agreement. Anthea bit her lip before finally accepting the document. In truth, her only goal the first time around had been escaping him, allowing him to be with Hetty. She'd walked away with nothing, a clean break. This new agreement included numerous provisions heavily tilted in her favor. The financial settlement alone totaled over $1 billion, not to mention the properties and vehicles he'd insisted on adding. She stared at the papers for a long while before asking softly, "Do I really have to sign it?" "Sign it," he said quietly. "If you don't, I'll find a way to give it all to you anyway. And honestly, your signature might ease my guilt a little." Held the pen in her hand, Anthea finally signed her name at the bottom of the agreement. On the day of her departure, the weather was perfect. Throughout the airport, travelers bid farewell to loved ones with smiles on their faces, secure in the knowledge they would meet again. Only Lance and Anthea stood without even a hint of a smile. "Will you ever come back?" Lance asked. Though he already knew the answer, he still clung to a sliver of hope. Maybe she would. After all, she'd spent over 20 years here, created countless beautiful memories beyond just those with him. Surely she'd feel nostalgic someday, and want to return to see it all again. But Anthea was determined to disappoint him. "No, home is wherever my parents are now." At her words, the light in Lance's eyes instantly dimmed, but he still couldn't give up. "What about me? Could I visit you instead? Even if just to see her from a distance?" This time Anthea didn't speak. She simply gazed at him silently, her answer painfully obvious. "Hey." Lance lowered his head with a hollow laugh. He should have known. After everything he'd done to her, her not hating him was already the best outcome he could hope for. How could he possibly expect the privilege of seeing her again? The announcement for her flight to London began playing over the speakers. Anthea said a quiet goodbye and turned toward the gate. The realization hit her then his kindness toward her had never been love. It was just an obligation born of their family's friendship, just his innate good manners, just the fact that he was, fundamentally, a decent person. Panic flooded Lance's eyes. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I was wrong, so wrong. Please, don't go." Anthea looked down at the hands encircling her waist and spoke softly. "Lance, there's no medicine for regret in this world. No matter how much you regret it now, we can't go back. We can only move forward." The hands that had finally held her tight reluctantly loosened. Lance watched helplessly as the woman he loved, the woman who had once loved him, disappeared through the gate. Unable to contain his anguish any longer, the pain in his heart tore through his nerves, and blood suddenly burst from his mouth. Amid passengers' screams, Lance collapsed to the floor. This time, there was no one who loved him rushing frantically to his side. In the hospital, doctors gently advised him to rest, but Lance could tell from Fred and Hosea's tearful whispers outside his door that he didn't have much time left. He wasn't surprised. During the period after Anthea had left him, he'd spent his days chain smoking and drinking himself into oblivion. That he'd survived this long was already a blessing. But he said nothing about his condition, simply gazing at Anthea's latest Instagram post. In the photo, she stood embracing her parents, all three smiling brightly at the camera. Her caption read, "Hope we can live happily ever after." Lance smiled to himself and whispered, "Anthea, I hope you'll be happy forever. Just without me in your rest life." The end. And that's a wrap on today's reading here at Booked for Drama. If you felt anything, rage, swoon, secondhand heartbreak, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow drama lovers. If you have any requests, drop them in the comments. Until next time, keep reading, and keep the drama on the page.